here today on one bill, and I want to thank everybody for coming here today. I want to thank you for your time and your attention to this issue. I know it's not an easy one. I know it's a difficult issue that we're discussing here today, but I want to let everyone know and please be respectful of each other's opinions. And I want to keep outbursts to a minimum, as in not have them at all. And if anybody wants to talk, honestly, we want to hear from everybody. So please don't hesitate. If you're not on this sign-up sheet that's right here in front of me, just let me know, and we'll call you up here because we want to hear from you, because it's important to us when we're making decisions on these issues. So I want to recognize, we've got Micah Caskey here, member of Judiciary. Lynn Bennett, who's here with us, who's the author of the bill we're discussing today. We've got Chairman Greg Delaney, and we have Representative Weston Newton here. Our attorney is Emma Dean, and my name is Peter McCoy, and we're going to go ahead and get started with some testimony today. The first bill we're going to discuss is H.3548, which is a bill, as already mentioned, is by Representative Lynn Bennett. We're lucky to have her with us here today to help explain what her bill does. And Lynn, I'm going to turn it over to you to tell us what the bill does. Thank you.
The bill basically just limits a procedure that would require a doctor to dismember a unborn child inside the fetus before removing it. And the reason that I feel this is so important is that when you went back to the Supreme Court rulings on partial birth abortion, this particular procedure was cited by the abortion industry as being even more dangerous than partial birth abortion. Yet today we are still permitting it to be performed. So if the procedure is more dangerous than a procedure that was already declared, and it's up to the states could declare it, but if it's already been declared to be harmful to an unborn child, and then I think we need to go and look at that procedure as well. The process, I believe there's a board over there in case anybody's wondering what dismemberment, it's called D&E, which is a nice name for it, so you don't have to admit that you're dismembering an unborn child and extracting the parts during the procedure. I believe that if more people understood what a D&E was, dismemberment abortion is really what it is, and it's been discussed, like I said, up to the Supreme Court. It's a well-known practice, and we just need to start looking out for children that cannot look out for themselves, and the most vulnerable are those that are not even here yet who have no say. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Bennett. Chairman Delaney.
Of course, Ms. Bennett can't offer any amendments because she's part of the subcommittee. She's not on the Judiciary Committee, but she's asked me to pass up an amendment that simplifies this bill. It's a strike-all, which simplifies this bill from 5 pages to 2 pages. The first part of the amendment merely outlaws the procedure, the method of dismemberment abortion, except in cases of where the life or of the mother is involved, or whether serious health risk is involved. Then that procedure can be performed much like it is in the rest of our abortion law. And it defines a serious health risk like it is in other parts of our abortion law. Necessitates abortion over pregnancy to avert death or to avert serious risk of substantial and irreversible physical impairment of a major bodily function. This does not include psychological or emotional conditions. This is a physical condition. It also defines what the procedure is, which is already was in her bill, but the amendment also defines it as causing the death of an unborn child knowingly, to dismember a living unborn child, to extract him or her one piece at a time from the uterus through the use of clamps, grasping, forceps, tongs, scissors, or similar instruments. Then it further defines what those instruments are. Then it defines who to supply to a physician, one licensed in the state, surgeon, osteopath, a physician licensed in the state of South Carolina. And if it was an individual who was not licensed as a physician and was illegally performing an abortion, that would certainly, this bill would certainly cover them also. tells what dismemberment is not, and that is a suction procedure that is used early in abortion procedures and not later. And it also has a cause of action. It's the same identical language that's in the current partial birth abortion statute. There's a cause of action against someone who does perform this procedure. And then there is injunctive relief. There's injunctive relief for the woman, if the woman is a minor, then her parent or guardian, and prosecuting attorney, of course. And then there's a severance clause or savings clause where if any part of this is found to be unconstitutional, which Ms. Bennett assured me it is not, that the whole bill will not fail for that one provision to be severed.
Ms. Newton.
Mr. McCoy, I said we're going to move approval of the amendment.
All those in favor of the Delaney amendment, which is strike and insert amendment, say aye. The ayes have it. So now this is the actual bill. And Chairman Delaney, maybe I'm reading it the wrong place. I just want to clarify. You said there was a cause of action.
Yes, that's in C.
It's in, okay, C.
Right.
Are the criminal penalties attached at all?
Yes, the criminal is a felony. It's a 2-year felony or a $10,000 fine.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for that. And now we're going to start to take some testimony from folks who are here today. Again, if you walked in late, my name is Peter McCoy. I want to make sure that we hear from you, so please let me know, raise your hand if we don't call your name. We want to make sure we hear from everybody. And if I mispronounce names, I apologize for that. First one up we have is Ann Warner. Ann, welcome. If you can push that button up there and make sure we can hear you.
Sure.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you, Ann.
Thank you. Chairman McCoy and members of the Constitutional Laws Subcommittee, my name is Ann Warner, and I'm the CEO of WREN, the Women's Rights and Empowerment Network, a statewide, nonpartisan nonprofit that is advancing the health, economic well-being, and rights of South Carolina's women, girls, and their families. Today, I'm here to ask that you oppose H.3548, a bill that would ban the most common method of a second trimester abortion and would do nothing to improve the safety of women's health care. This bill substitutes political agendas for the medical expertise and experience of trained healthcare professionals. Doctors performing a second trimester abortion would have to resort to alternatives. They may not be what they, based on their professional medical judgment, think is best for their patient. Every pregnant woman faces unique circumstances. Doctors should be able to offer their patients the best medical care possible based on their medical expertise without political interference. The method this bill seeks to outlaw is the most common surgical technique for second trimester abortions and can be safely performed in an office, clinic, or operating room. The risk of major complications is less than 1%. Alternative procedures could increase the risk of complications for a woman and can make the procedure longer and potentially more painful. A woman's health care should be grounded in safety and medical best practices, and this bill would work against those values. I ask that before you cast your vote today, that you think about the consequences of taking away a medically safe and common healthcare option from women and limiting the options of doctors to treat their patients. Please protect the health and safety of women and vote no on H.3548. Thank you.
And thank you for your presentation, and thank you for being here with us today. And just so committee members are aware, so you're aware, we did receive a packet from you, so we do have your letter up here as part of our record and part of our notes too. So thank you for that. Any questions for Ann? I don't see any. Ann, thanks so much. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Lynn T. Welcome, Lynn.
Thank you very much for listening to me this morning. I'm Lynn T. with the League of Women Voters. And we ask you to please reject this bill. 3548 proposes a ban on a safe and medically accepted procedure. It is opposed by physicians because it interferes with the relationship between women and their physicians. It is furthermore a procedure that is protected by 40 years of U.S. Supreme Court decisions. The court has repeatedly ruled that states may not prohibit abortion prior to viability. We strongly urge that you reject this bill that is inconsistent with the constitutional rights of the women of South Carolina and is an intrusion into the doctor-patient relationship. Be glad to respond to any questions.
Any questions for Ms. Teague? Thank you, Ms. Teague. I really appreciate it. Appreciate your time here today. Next up, we have Amy Crockett. Welcome, Amy.
Thank you. My name is Dr. Amy Crockett. I'm an OBGYN physician with subspecialty training in maternal fetal medicine, and I've been practicing in Greenville for the last 10 years. I'm also the new vice chair of the South Carolina section of the American Congress of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, and I'm presenting this testimony on their behalf today. We represent more than 400 physicians and partners in women's health in South Carolina. South Carolina ACOG members are all dedicated to providing safe, evidence-based medical care for women in this state. The passage of H.3548 will ban a safe, effective method of abortion for women in our state, dilation and evacuation. For many women, this procedure is the safest approach to second trimester abortion, and that is a determination that must be made by a physician based on a patient's individual circumstances. We should all agree that a women's health, and not politics, should drive important medical decisions. Women need to be able to discuss all options of their care with their physicians, and decisions about health care should remain in the exam room and out of the political arena. ACOG's statement of policy on legislative interference states that laws should not interfere with the ability of physicians to determine the appropriate treatment options for patients. ACOG strongly opposes any governmental interference that threatens communication between patients and their physicians or causes a physician to compromise his or her medical judgment about what information or treatment is in the best interest of the patient. We believe that women in South Carolina deserve to enter their doctor's office with the assurance that the options for their care will be formed based on scientific research, the patient care experience of their provider, and patient safety. Passage of H.3548 would deny this right to women in our state. This issue is emotionally charged, but that does not justify intrusion into the doctor-patient relationship. Healthcare decisions belong in the room where all options for a patient's care can be discussed and the most appropriate plan of care for that patient can be offered. I urge the members of the House Judiciary Committee to oppose this bill and support women's health in South Carolina. Thank you for allowing me to submit this written testimony. Do y'all have a copy of it? Or?
I don't. We're going to grab it from you right now. Thank you, Dr. Crockett. And we have a member who has a quick question for you, too,
Yes,
from Micah Cassie.
Thank you, Doctor. Appreciate your testimony. I just, for my own edification, other than this procedure, how many different abortion procedures are available for second trimester abortions? I realize that could be a very technical question, but in broad terms.
Yeah, so in general, the alternate procedure requires basically an induction of labor, and that's a process that could take several days and also can be associated with a considerable amount of bleeding. It usually requires a patient to be in the hospital for 1 or 2 days to accomplish that. So it has a lot more risks to the patient than
So there's one other way to perform an abortion.
there are other options. Yes, there are.
And I realize I'm putting you on the spot here to ask this question, but how many different methods are there to perform an abortion during the same period of pregnancy?
I think everybody has a slightly different technique, but in general, there are just 2 main choices. There's a D&E or there's an induction of labor.
Okay. Thank you very much. That's very helpful. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being with us here today. I'd also like to recognize we have Heather Crawford with us here, too, as part of our hearing today. Next up, we have Ashley, is it Lido?
It's Lido, like the day.
Thank you, Ashley. Thanks for being
Thank
here.
you. I'm Ashley Lido, and I'm actually reading a testimony on behalf of 34 doctors from MUSC. You have a copy of it in front of you from staff. So you can read along with me instead of having to listen to me. So, Representative McCoy and members of the Constitutional Law Subcommittee, we appreciate the opportunity to submit testimony today. As obstetrician gynecologists who care for women in South Carolina every single day of the year, we urge you to oppose H.3548. The ill-advised legislation would ban the most common method of abortion after 13 weeks and the method with the fewest complications, undoubtedly threatening both the health and constitutional rights of our patients and stripping South Carolina's women of access to compassionate health care based on science. As obstetrician-gynecologists, we have spent countless years in training to ensure that we have the knowledge and skill to provide the best medical care for women. This legislation would tie our hands when caring for patients with complicated medical problems during pregnancy. Under H.3548, we would face an unconscionable choice: deny our patients the extremely safe, evidence-based medical care that they have chosen, or face criminal penalties. I ask you to imagine sitting with your doctor, reviewing the treatment options available to you, but then being informed that the option with the fewest complications has been deemed illegal by the state legislature because of their political views. Without question, this legislation compromises the integrity of the patient-physician relationship by taking medical decisions out of the hands of women and their OBGYNs and putting them in the hands of politicians. Our patients weigh many personal values, experiences, and circumstances when processing our medical counseling and coming to a decision about which treatment they wish to pursue. It's extremely dangerous for legislators to presume that they are better equipped than medically trained physicians and informed patients to judge what treatment approach is in the best interest of the patient. We recognize that abortion is a charged political issue and generates strong feelings on all sides. But our patients are human beings who deserve accurate information and the reassurance that their doctors are not prevented by politicians from offering them the best treatment based on current research. Ideology should not govern the patient-doctor relationship. Physicians from all specialties hold that science, not political beliefs, are the foundation of good medicine. I urge this committee to consider both the threat H.3548 poses to South Carolina women's ability to access safe and compassionate care, and the dangerous precedent it sets for the practice of medicine in our state. Sound health policy on scientific facts. A sound health policy is based on scientific facts. Patients deserve reassurance that their doctor is free to provide treatment that's based on science, not politics. Patients deserve laws that allow them to choose from a full range of safe treatment options based on their personal circumstances and beliefs. Please oppose this unwise and unsafe legislation. And then there's 3 pages of signatures.
Ashley, thank you, and just so you are aware too.
There's one missing because they had 48 hours.
Listen, I understand.
Yeah.
But we appreciate the package that you put together for us. We all have it up here in front of us. It's all part of our record up here as well. Any questions for Ashley? Thank you. Appreciate that. Next up is Vicki Ringer. Welcome, Vicki.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman and members of this committee, I'm Vicki Ringer, the South Carolina Director of Public Affairs with Planned Parenthood South Atlantic, which has health centers in both Columbia and Charleston. I am here today representing the thousands of South Carolina women, men, and teens who rely on Planned Parenthood for reproductive health care, and I'm asking you to oppose House Bill 3548. This bill is a blatant attempt to restrict a woman's ability to make deeply personal pregnancy decisions with the guidance of her family, her faith, and of the healthcare professionals she trusts, without interference from politicians. We can all agree that the best medical science regarding women's health, and not political agendas, should drive important medical decisions. That is why I urge each of you to vote against this bill, which would prevent physicians from using their best medical judgment when providing abortion care, interfere in the doctor-patient relationship, and potentially place women's health and lives at risk. House Bill 3548 seeks to ban one of the safest and most common methods of abortion later in a woman's pregnancy. While more than 99% of abortions performed in South Carolina take place during the first trimester, there are compelling medical reasons why women may need an abortion later in her pregnancy. In some cases, significant health risks to the pregnant woman develop over time, while other cases involve a much-wanted pregnancy gone tragically wrong when fetal anomalies are identified that could not be detected earlier in the pregnancy. For other women, existing restrictions on abortion, including mandatory delays, prohibition on funding and insurance, can push an abortion later into pregnancy. The truth of the matter is that we can't know all the personal and medical circumstances behind a woman's decision to have an abortion. Every person's situation is different, and there are no simple answers. What is simple is that it is essential that doctors have every medical option available to them so that they can best address their patient's specific circumstances. This bill undermines a doctor's ability to do just that, and is why these measures are opposed by leading medical groups such as the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists and the American Medical Association. With South Carolina's continued high rates of unintended pregnancy, infant mortality, and skyrocketing maternal mortality, we should be focused on improving access to health care for all women and policies that actually support the families of our state, instead of chipping away at our rights based on political ideology. Furthermore, measures like this one are clearly unconstitutional and have been blocked by courts in all of the states where it has been challenged. Passage of this bill will open our state up to costly litigation and cost money that could be utilized to address the real issues facing South Carolinians. In short, any bill that prevents a doctor from giving a woman care based on their medical expertise and the woman's individual circumstances is bad medicine, bad public policy, and bad for women. I urge you to vote no on House Bill 3548. Thank you.
Vicki, thank you for your time. Thank you for your testimony. Any questions for Vicki at all? Are you handing something up to us?
This is my copy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next speaker we have is Tiana Teal. Welcome, Ms. Teal.
Hello. My name is Tiana Teal. I am testifying on behalf of Don Bigham, a fellow at the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, who could not be here today due to the short notice of the hearing. To Chairman McCoy and members of the Constitutional Law Subcommittee, the predominant approach to abortion after 13 weeks, commonly referred to as dilation and evacuation, is evidence-based and medically preferred because it results in the fewest complications for women compared to alternative procedures. Efforts to ban specific types of procedures will limit the ability of physicians to provide women with the medically appropriate care they need, and will likely result in worsened outcomes and increased complications. These legislative efforts are based on non-medical subjective language. This language will create confusion, thus putting women at risk and in certain cases actually leading to abortion later in pregnancy. Quite simply, these restrictions represent legislative interference at its worst. Doctors will be forced by ill-advised, unscientifically motivated policy to provide lesser care to patients. This is unacceptable. Medical decisions about reproductive health, especially given the complex circumstances that often accompany second trimester abortions, should be made by each individual woman in consultation with those she trusts, most including her OBGYN, not politicians. OBGYNs regularly see firsthand the reasons why women may need abortion care, as well as pain that many of these women are in when confronting these decisions. Banning specific abortion procedures would leave physicians unable to provide women with medically appropriate care. This includes women who have made the difficult decision to end pregnancies for reasons including fetal anomalies or other unexpected obstetric outcomes. This is simply cruel. Medical care must be guided by sound science and by each patient's individual needs, not by legislative restrictions. We continue to oppose laws that limit the ability of American women to get the reproductive health services that they need and that take medical decisions out of the hands of physicians and their patients. Respectfully, Don Bigham, fellow American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists in Spartanburg, South Carolina.
Thank you, Ms. Teal. I appreciate it. Any questions from Ms. Teal in her testimony? Thank you so much. Next up is Marta Lice. Hope I said that correctly. Welcome.
Thank you. My name is Marta Belize, and I'm not here representing anybody other than myself. And I apologize in advance because I'm not normally a public speaker, and I've never addressed a session of any legislative body on any reason.
We're happy to have you.
Well, thank you. I wanted to share my story though, because I think it's very illustrative of what's going on here in this conversation. In the 90s, I was diagnosed with papillary thyroid cancer, which is a form of cancer that disproportionately affects women in their 20s, 30s, and 40s. And it was in fact my gynecologist who started this series of events that discovered this. I had gone to my annual visit, and along with the regular health screenings and stuff, I discussed with him if I was considering getting pregnant, you know, was that something I should do, and whatever, and whether there was any additional screenings I should consider in light of that. The doctor's response was I was a healthy 30-something, and there was no reason to believe I couldn't get pregnant if I wanted to. But as long as I was there, he'd order a blood test and test a few extra things. But, you know, go ahead, good luck. You should have no problems getting pregnant. If, you know, if there's anything wrong, you won't be able to. Fabulous. I went home, and my husband and I gleefully abandoned everything, threw caution to the wind, and thought we'd see what happened. A few days later, I got a call from my gynecologist. My TSH was off, and TSH is your thyroid stimulating hormone, and there's a certain level that's helping, and being too low or too high. Mine, I think, was too low. He said this was probably no big deal, something I shouldn't worry about. Most likely I would have to take synthetic thyroid hormone to help regulate my TSH levels. But there were other possibilities of things that it could be, like cancer. But none of those were real likely. So anyway, just to be on the safe side, he was going to refer me to an endocrinologist, and my husband and I decided, well, we'd maybe suspend any attempts at baby making further until we got this whole thing straightened out. I went to the endocrinologist he recommended. An examination led to the discovery of nodules on my thyroid. And if you don't know where your thyroid is, it's this little thing here that's butterfly shaped, and it's right under the skin of your throat. Somebody who knows what they're doing, and it's certainly not me, can apparently feel nodules on your thyroid if they exist. And he found a couple of those, and he sent me off to a heroin biopsy with another doctor to test those and see what they were. The initial result of that looked like, yeah, it's possibly cancer, but the results of the biopsy would take a couple days to confirm. Again, I was sent home and told I would be called by the endocrinologist. A few days later, I got the call that the lab results were in. My husband accompanied me to the appointment because now it sort of sounded real scary. And I sat down, and the diagnosis was, yes, I had cancer. But this was something that we couldn't really be sure of how bad it would be until I had surgery. And that's the first step in the treatment of thyroid cancer, is to remove all or part of the thyroid, typically. After which you need I-131 ablation therapy. And I'm not a doctor, so I'm probably saying some of these medically things, but these are the best as I remember them. And this involves the ingestion of a radioactive iodine capsule, because thyroid tissue uniquely attracts iodine in the human body, and that radioactive iodine would go to that tissue and hopefully kill it, including anything that might metastasize in my body. I listened very carefully as my doctor ran through this whole list of treatments and timetables and all the things we had to do, and I let him get to his end of his spiel, and I looked at him and I said, and what if I'm pregnant? To say his face fell would be an understatement. The man's face drained completely of color, and I knew I had thrown him for a loop, and I was like, oh dear. The thing is, I did not know I was pregnant at this point. I just knew I could be. I hadn't had any of the telltale signs that women have of, you know, oh, I knew I was pregnant because suddenly I wanted to eat fish, or you know, girls. I hadn't even missed a menstrual period yet. All I'd done was count on my fingers and figure out that at any moment my period was due, but it wasn't actually late. I had not even considered using a home pregnancy test, even though I was in this position and I knew I was possibly about to have a cancer conversation. The elapsed time between the initial appointment with my gynecologist and this point was less than 4 weeks. Well, the endocrinologist, needless to say, looked at me and said, go home, call your gynecologist. So I did, but 30 minutes later, as I was walking through my front door, my phone is ringing, and it is my gynecologist. I'm setting up an appointment for you on Monday. This was Friday. Please be here bright and early. Yes, sir, I will. On Monday, I went in and did the pregnancy test. Yes, you guessed it, I was pregnant. The official confirmation of my pregnancy came 4 days after my official cancer diagnosis. So then the conversation became, did I want to carry on with this pregnancy? I obviously needed treatment, and I obviously required treatment that would be extremely detrimental to any fetus that I was carrying. I said, yes, I did, assuming there was a good chance I would survive the cancer and that just barely an embryo inside me would not be adversely harmed by the treatment. In consultation with 2 endocrinologists, my OBGYN, a high-risk pregnancy doctor, and a thyroid surgeon, I decided to risk waiting until after my first trimester was complete to do the surgery. This would give the fetus the best chance of doing the major developmental things that happen, and again, I can't explain that very well, not a doctor. Hopefully that all would have occurred before we had the surgery. So I waited until my 15th week of pregnancy. The surgeon performed a thyroidectomy, removed my entire thyroid and 8 lymph nodes. Afterwards, the surgeon and the endocrinologist both said it was good, we hadn't waited any longer. The problem with delaying the surgery for the pregnancy is the same environment where the fetus grows is also a very good environment for cancer to grow. So there was a big risk of giving it basically a great playground to run free in and do whatever. They also concluded that I definitely needed to have this iodine 131 treatment. Again, after a big consultation with all these doctors, I decided to delay the ablation therapy because this would be completely incompatible with the pregnancy. And so I did. I took the risk, and I hoped for the best, and I prayed that it will turn out all right. My daughter was born 6 months later. I received the radioactive iodine treatment 6 weeks after that. And you may wonder why I'm telling you all this deeply personal story that really, truly is not your business. And it's because I was lucky. I was so lucky. I mean, twice I had to decide between my health going forward and a pregnancy I was carrying that I wanted. I got lucky. It all turned out all right. But I know there are other women that are in this situation or will end up in this situation and won't be as lucky. And I'm, really beg you to reject this H.3548 because women and their doctors need to be able to make these decisions on the safest and most, best procedures. And what I heard from the doctor's testimony a second ago is that alternative is more difficult to go through and more expensive to execute. And I don't know what that would have done in my situation. So anyway, long babbling, and I didn't know I was supposed to bring handouts, so I didn't.
No, you've done a fantastic job in your presentation, and I commend you for your strength in sharing your story in front of a group of strangers up here, and it means a lot to us, and it means a lot to us when we go to vote too. So we appreciate that. We appreciate your efforts, and again, thank you for sharing that with us today. Any questions at all? Doesn't look like it. Thank you again. Thanks for traveling to be here with us.
Thank you.
Greatly appreciated. Next up, we have Brittany Kilpatrick. I didn't see you back there.
I'm hiding.
Behind the podium.
I'm hiding.
Thank you, Brittany. Thanks for being with us.
Absolutely. Hi, my name is Brittany Kilpatrick. I'm an attorney and a small business owner, and born, raised, and educated in South Carolina, specifically James Island. Today, I'll be providing a short personal statement to be followed by testimony on behalf of Susan Dunn of the South Carolina ACLU. First of all, I'd like to wish you all a happy International Women's Day. I find it interesting that on all days, on International Women's Day, that we're discussing a bill relating to women's bodily autonomy. In addition to this being a worldwide celebration of the achievements of women, it is also an International Women's Strike. Whether it's symbolic or happenstance that these events are all coinciding, I'll leave you to ponder. Chances are all of you have known women who've had abortions. Family, friends, neighbors, classmates, your doctor, your accountant, your cashier at the grocery store. If you don't, it's because these women have chosen to not share that information with you, and that's another issue. Access to safe and legal abortions of all varieties that a doctor deems appropriate ensures that women have choices, that we aren't thrust into poverty, that we aren't mothers before we're ready, that we can finish school, that we aren't bringing children into abusive situations, that we can make decisions about our health care with people who've actually gone to school for this, not people who draft legislation for a living, and I'm saying that as a lawyer, that we can exercise basic autonomy over our bodies and our futures. So I recommend that if your aim is to reduce the need for abortions in South Carolina, that you start by directing the time, energy, and resources that were put into this bill into something statistically shown to actually reduce the abortion rate. Funding contraceptives, sex education, and family planning services. Regulations like H.3548 make women's lives more challenging and result in women seeking abortions under dangerous and life-threatening circumstances. Moreover, it affects the most vulnerable among us. Pregnancy should not turn a woman into a second-class citizen. It's already hard enough. I hope you'll consider stopping this bill in its tracks before it's able to do irreversible harm to the women of South Carolina. At this time, I'll be presenting testimony on behalf of the American Civil Liberties Union of South Carolina. This testimony was prepared by its legal director, Susan Dunn, who could not be here, and I have handouts for y'all afterwards because it has helpful citations.
Can we grab those
Absolutely.
before you speak on that, just like to look at it while
Sure.
you are presenting? Didn't mean to throw you off there.
No.
Thank you.
The ACLU of South Carolina works to preserve and strengthen the constitutional liberties, including the right of reproductive freedom for all people. The ACLU of South Carolina opposes H.3548 because it criminalizes a safe method of abortion and threatens to block a woman's access to care. A recurring comment made in the present debate over health care reform is that the ACA is defective as it gives the government control over patients' medical choices, including the choice of physician. Women's medical choices should be afforded the same respect. We stand before you today, International Women's Day, to urge you to leave the most intimate of medical decisions to patients and their doctors, and to refrain from passing legislation which interferes with women's medical choices for political reasons. By banning a safe method of abortion, this bill inappropriately interferes with the practice of medicine and a woman's access to care. Medical professionals must be able to provide each woman with the highest quality of medical care based on their training and expertise and each woman's individual circumstances. Instead, H.3548 legislates the manner in which doctors provide safe, appropriate care to a woman in need of an abortion. That is why medical experts like the American Congress of Obstetricians and Gynecologists oppose this bill. Furthermore, H.3548 is unconstitutional under established U.S. Supreme Court precedent. By referring this bill to the Constitutional Law Subcommittee, the SC House signals that this bill raises constitutional issues. The Supreme Court has long held that states may not impose an undue burden on a woman's access to abortion before viability, and it has repeatedly made clear that banning a common, medically approved method of abortion poses an undue burden, thereby violating the Constitution's protections. The ACLU of South Carolina strongly discourages this committee from passing an unconstitutional bill that could invite costly litigation, as it has in 4 states that have passed similar legislation and are now facing legal challenges. The laws in all 4 of those states are currently blocked from taking effect. We may not all agree on abortion, but we should agree that it's best for a doctor to be able to provide the safest, most appropriate medical care for each patient. We urge you to oppose H.3548 not only because it's unconstitutional, but because it bans a safe method of abortion for a woman who needs to end a pregnancy. Signed, Susan Dunn, Legal Director of the ACLU of South Carolina. Thank you.
Brittany, thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you for having this up here to add to our records that we have in reviewing this bill. Any questions for Brittany at all? I don't see any. Brittany, thank you.
Thank you.
Glad we shared James Island comment. Next up, we have Pat Forbes. Welcome, Pat.
Thank you.
More sorry.
Close enough.
Thought that was a knee in there. Thank you.
So I just want to thank you for the amount of time that you dedicated to this today. I know that this is a lot of repetitive information you're going to hear. As you know, my name is Pat Forbes. I am a local attorney. I'm affiliated with Planned Parenthood and the League of Women Voters. And I have a little side job that I'm going to talk to you about because I think it brings home, as others have mentioned, the personal aspect of this. I do want to say, though, as an attorney, that I agree with the ACLU that this is unconstitutional. As previous cases have shown from our Supreme Court, that as long as the fetus is not viable, it is unconstitutional to put any barrier in the way of a woman seeking abortion. And as such, for us to go forward on a bill that other states have already evaluated or are considering rejecting, there's no need for us to do this at this time, because I will tell you, women are going to get an abortion. I am one of the few attorneys in the state who provide judicial bypasses. These are legal proceedings where girls under the age of 17 who cannot get permission from their parents to seek an abortion go to the family court and have to prove to the family court that they have the requisite maturity to be allowed to make this decision on their own. And I will tell you, this is a huge, huge journey for these girls. And I believe that if a girl who is pregnant and frightened, whether she be 14, 15, or 16, can navigate this judicial nightmare and be allowed to make this decision, she is going to seek any way to have an abortion. By having her go to the hospital, be forced to go through some kind of delivery process is unconscionable. These girls are frightened, they're concerned, and we do not need to drive them to other means however frightened they may be. Now, some of you may not remember the pre-abortion times, but I think there are probably some women here who probably during high school can remember the sister of a friend who tried to self-abort with a hanger in the school bathroom and other things. Women are going to seek abortions. It is our job, all of our jobs as members of the state and members of our society, to make sure that this procedure is safe and readily acceptable. We do not need to criminalize doctors who provide a safe, legitimate way to provide the service to the members of our society, the women who seek this procedure, and I'm asking that you reject Bill 3548.
Pat, thank you for your presentation today. I'm sorry about the last name too. I misread that on here, but we appreciate you taking the time to be here with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. And this one next is Lisa Van Riper. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. It is interesting that we're here on International Women's Day, and I come to speak for all women today, the born and the unborn. We've heard the words, the most vulnerable among us. Is there anyone more vulnerable than this child who's in the womb, who is getting ready to be dismembered as a means of destroying the fetus? I am president of South Carolina Citizens for Life, full disclosure, but I'm really coming on behalf of just making a statement, a personal statement today. And I'll just read it, and I have copies of this for the committee. I come in favor today of H.3548, the Unborn Child Protection from Dismemberment Abortion Act. It's somewhat of a surprise to me that I'm standing here in support of this legislation, because 30 years ago I would have been sitting with most of these women. I have been devoted, however, to children and families all of my adult life, as a mother, now as a grandmother, a first grade teacher, president of the YWCA in Greenville. I've been also active years ago with the League of Women Voters in Greenville. I've been a mentor through the Junior League, a member of the South Carolina State Board of Education, a member for 12 years of the South Carolina First Steps Board, and the executive director of Putting Families First Foundation, which was recognized by the National Governors Association as a model program. My concern for children and their families is rooted in the recognition that all human life has inherent worth and dignity. It was out of that recognition of the dignity and worth of every human life that I began working to extend that concern and care to the unborn children and their moms in 1988. Until that point, I would have described myself as a feminist that embraced a public pro-choice position. However, in 1987, I was confronted, I hate to say, not with morality, not with religion, but with science. I was confronted with the biological information on the humanity of the unborn child. I then took a year to read Roe v. Wade and investigate the breadth of that decision. And I understood the inhumanity of the abortion procedure, the reason that most women are seeking abortions, and the extent of the abortion law in America that puts us up with people like North Korea. I realized that I could no longer demand rights for myself as a feminist while denying the rights to life for my unborn sisters and, yes, my brothers. Part of changing my mind on this issue was being confronted with a documentary by then former abortionist Dr. Bernard Nathanson, a founder of what is today called the National Abortion Rights Action League, and a doctor who had performed or overseen over 50,000 abortions. This documentary, called The Eclipse of Reason, showed a real-time ultrasound of a D&E second trimester abortion, the same procedure that this bill would prohibit. And after seeing Dr. Nathanson's film and hearing his commentary, I was left with no doubt that I had witnessed the destruction of an unborn human being in a most barbaric manner. It was at that very moment that I came to the same conclusion as Dr. Nathanson, that such a procedure as this should not be part of a civilized society. Not only, and we have heard many, many stories today, and I understand, I do understand. I understand that we're often confronted with situations not of our choosing. And not only am I concerned about children and families and have tried to do things to intervene to help those, both unborn and born, I am concerned also about those who have disabilities, sometimes those that begin as fetal anomalies. This is rooted in a personal experience because my husband has multiple sclerosis. As of today, his condition is stable, and with minor limitations, he's leading a normal life. However, we know that the next exacerbation could bring a deterioration that could produce a profound disability. Would we subject him to a dismemberment procedure to address the disability? No, no one in this room would. This bill, in spite of some of the testimony, does not prohibit abortion. There are other abortion procedures available in the second trimester. This procedure prohibits only a D&E abortion performed on a living unborn child. Further, this bill does not even prohibit all abortions by this procedure, as there is a provision for an exception for serious physical health threats to the mother, some that which do occur, such that Marta testified about today. This bill does, as did the ban on partial birth abortion, prohibit one barbaric method of abortion on a living unborn child. I believe that this is a bill on which both pro-life and pro-choice people can agree. Except in the rarest of cases, this type of practice has no place in a civilized society. We are better people than this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'd be glad to address any questions.
Questions from Ms. Van Riper? I don't see any of you. Appreciate you being here today. Thank you for your service to our state as well, for teaching our youth in the first grade. Next up is Holly Gatlin. Welcome, Holly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am the Executive Director of South Carolina Citizens for Life, and there are a number of groups here who support this bill, and those include the Catholic Diocese, South Carolina Baptist Convention, Palmetto Family Council, the Nehemiah Project, and also the Association of Pregnancy Care Centers. South Carolina's Unborn Child Protection from Dismemberment Abortion Act protects living unborn children from being torn limb from limb. Dilation and evacuation by dismemberment abortion is a violent and dehumanizing procedure that confuses the medical, legal, and ethical duties of a physician to preserve and promote life. This law bans the barbaric killing of a human being and provides for a medical emergency exception if the mother's life or physical health is in danger. In Gonzalez versus Carhart, Justice Anthony Kennedy said of this abortion procedure that, quote, no one would dispute that for many, D&E is a procedure itself laden with the power to devalue human life. Also, in the words of Dr. Donna Harrison, a board-certified obstetrician and gynecologist and executive director of the American Association of Pro-Life Obstetricians and Gynecologists with over 4,500 members nationwide, she says, quote, it is hard to imagine a more gruesome way to die if veterinarians ripped apart living dogs or cats to kill them in this same way. That living human fetuses are ripped apart in the D&E procedure. The outcry would be deafening Further, Dr. Harrison says it is, quote, completely medically unnecessary, close quote. For the record, I am including a photograph of a dismembered unborn child. This photograph is enclosed in a sealed envelope and can be viewed at one's own discretion. Additionally, the United States Supreme Court recognizes that states may assert a compelling interest in protecting human life. The General Assembly of South Carolina has the right to hold our state to a higher standard and should not allow the degradation of life. 7 states have already banned this savage practice. They are Alabama, Arkansas, Kansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Oklahoma, and West Virginia. As a pro-life state, South Carolina must join these states in protecting the vulnerable from a torturous death by dismemberment abortion. South Carolina Citizens for Life and numerous other groups, including the National Right to Life Committee, urges and encourages the members of this constitutional law subcommittee to pass H.3548. And also in one comment on the International Day of Women. I think that most women most pro-life women would say, no, we are for equal rights for unborn women. Thank you.
Thank you, Holly. We appreciate it. Do we have your information in your packet? Okay. I'll make sure we've got that for the record up here as well. Thank you for being here with us. Next up is Orrin Smith. Welcome, Orrin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Orrin Smith, President of Palmetto Family Council, a public policy research organization based in Columbia since its founding in 1994. I just simply wanted to rise in support of the good work the South Carolina Citizens for Life and others have done on this bill, and to thank the 22 co-sponsors that have already signed on as co-sponsors of the bill. Our organization has a medical division, a legal division, and a new ministerial division called the Nehemiah Network of 175 pastors who were here in the State House a couple of weeks ago. They're all very supportive of this legislation. And I'd like to also specifically support the good work on the amendment. The amendment that has been offered is a much simpler version that I think will be much easier to enforce and be much clearer for everyone to understand. So very supportive of the shorter draft that follows the state code in the amendment form. Thank you.
Thank you, Orrin. Any questions for Orrin at all? Thank you, sir. Appreciate your time and being here with us today. Michael Aquilano. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you, Chairman. My name is Michael Aquilano, and thank you for pronouncing that correctly. That's an odd name. Coming from the north. I represent hundreds of thousands of faithful Catholics in South Carolina, hundreds of priests and religious sisters, physicians, lawyers, and Catholic-owned businesses. As many know, we are the fastest growing population in South Carolina. And it shouldn't be surprising where we stand on this issue. The Catholic Church stands for the vulnerable and especially the unborn. The dignity of the human person will always be our first priority, from the poor, the weak, the ill, and the disabled, but especially those without a voice, the unborn. We are in support of this life-affirming legislation and are in support of the amendment that was proposed and adopted today. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. We appreciate you being here with us today. Next up is Jennifer, I think it's Popick.
You got it.
Thank you. My name is Jennifer Popick. I'm the Legislative Director and Attorney with National Right to Life. I was on a small drafting team that came up with the model legislation. I'm here today to testify and urge you to support this legislation that the Unborn Child Protection from Dismemberment Act could be upheld as constitutional by U.S. Supreme Court in light of its decision in upholding the Partial Birth Abortion Ban Act in 2007 in Gonzalez v. Carhart. This law raises constitutional issues that are very similar, nearly identical in fact, to the Gonzalez case, because HB 3548, as with the Partial Birth Abortion Ban Act, bans a specific procedure. In fact, the Gonzalez court not only examined partial birth abortion, referred to as either DNX or intact D&E, but it also discussed the procedure that you're considering banning in 3548, the D&E or dilation of the birth canal and piecemeal extraction, evacuation of the unborn. The court in Gonzalez justified the federal law protecting unborn children from partial birth abortion for 2 reasons. And let me briefly mention here that partial birth abortion didn't just apply in the last trimester. It was a procedure that could apply in both the 2nd and 3rd trimester, and it applied pre-viability. So I just wanted to note that. The court, in upholding partial birth abortion, which is very similar procedurally to the procedure that you guys are considering, stated, based on the ruling, the premise that the state, quote, from the inception of the pregnancy maintains its own regulatory interest in protecting the life of the fetus that may become a child, where a state has a rational basis to act and it does not impose an undue burden, the state may use its regulatory powers to bar certain procedures and to substitute others, all in furtherance of its legitimate interest in regulating the medical profession, in order to promote respect for life, including the life of the unborn. That was language from the U.S. Supreme Court. And second, the court based their ruling on the government's interest in protecting the interest and integrity of the ethics of the medical profession. Essentially, they were concerned that that partial birth abortion, much like this, was a procedure so laden with the power to devalue human life that this would, if a woman would find out later what this procedure really was, it would have this harmful impact on the medical profession, and that there were certain professionals doing this, it was so harmful to the medical profession. This is what the court said. The author of the Gonzalez opinion, Justice Kennedy, widely viewed as the swing vote on abortion, he himself graphically described dismemberment abortion in an earlier case, stating, the fetus, quote, in many cases dies just as a human adult or child would. It bleeds to death as it is torn limb from limb. Notably, the dissent in Gonzalez in that 2007 case, when they were contrasting partial birth abortion and dismemberment, this is what they said. Non-intact D&E, meaning partial birth abortion, could be characterized as, they were contrasting dismemberment with partial birth, and they were saying it could be equally characterized as brutal, involving as it does tearing the fetus apart, ripping off its limbs. The notion that either of these two equally gruesome procedures is more akin to infanticide than the other, or that the state furthers any legitimate interest by banning one but not the other, is simply irrational. So, and we have the dissent saying the two procedures were quite equivalent. That's why I read you that quote. Simply put, H.3548 does not create an undue burden, nor did the Partial Birth Abortion Ban Act, because other methods can be used, one where dismemberment isn't causing the death of the unborn child. Let me just basically give you a couple of, I know there's been some back and forth whether or not there's other options, and the one that was option, an induction is in fact a more costly and lengthy procedure. But let me be clear, what we're banning here is when you're dismembering a living unborn child. Many professionals out there and use fetal demise first. Your bill would not be banning that. An abortion where fetal demise was caused first, either through digoxin or potassium put in the amniotic fluid or in the baby's heart, or if there was a transection of the umbilical cord. So if the fetal demise occurred first, and then the baby was dismembered, that's not something that you guys are all making illegal, and this is something that there's a good deal of medical literature on out there, that the risk associated with causing fetal demise first, those risks are very low, if existent at all in certain procedures. Although Gonzalez argued that there's medical opinion to the contrary, back and forth, and this basically gets to the point that there was medical uncertainty in the partial birth abortion case. You know, some were saying it was medically necessary, it was the safest procedure, but the court said, you know what, we're not going to be the final arbiter of whether or not we're going to, come down to one side or the other on medical uncertainty. Our side says something, the other side says something. What the court says is that we look to you as the states upon, the findings, what you all find, we're going to defer to that. And so that's what we're asking you to do here today. In closing, because of the close resemblance of the constitutional issues settled in the Partial Birth Abortion Ban Act, applying here, the Supreme Court could uphold it against constitutional attack. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might all have.
Jennifer, briefly, we talked about this earlier with questions that Representative Caskey raised. Can you give this committee examples of alternatives to second trimester methods of abortion other than this particular procedure?
What it would be a D&E abortion, one done with fetal demise occurring first, where the cause of death isn't the dismemberment, but the cause of death isn't, the death is induced beforehand, and then a D&E can occur.
Fetal demise means?
Fetal demise means the baby is killed prior to it being dismembered, frankly. And so there's many procedures out there, there's a vast amount of medical literature out there, and frankly, there's a study that we cite to in the testimony I've given you that showed that women actually prefer this. They would prefer that that fetal demise was induced first by, I think, something around 90% of women preferred that it was done this way. And so there's a wide variety of procedures abortionists use, but you would put digoxin into the baby's heart. You could put some other potassium chloride into the amniotic fluid. You could transect the umbilical cord. All of those things will cause fetal demise. And then this, like they say, common D&E procedure can be performed at that point. We're only banning D&Es where the tearing apart is what the baby's bleeding to death, essentially. The ripping apart is what kills the baby, and that's what you're all banning.
Listen, my question again, and I appreciate the explanation. Are there alternatives to the D&E procedure that's used in second trimesters?
Yes, we would say that D&Es where fetal demise occurs first is the alternate, the main alternate procedure.
Okay. Any questions for Jennifer? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate your testimony. Wayne Cockfield.
Yes. Is it okay if I come right here? I can't.
Absolutely. Wayne, we can get you.
I have a loud voice. I was a sergeant in the Marine Corps.
We look forward to hearing from you. We also get you a microphone here too.
Okay.
Thank you, Wayne. Thanks for being with us.
Okay. I'm here in support of the Unborn Child Protection from Dismemberment Act. You know, we've reached a point in this country where there seems to be a disconnect between what we want to believe and what the truth is. Now, I'm here to represent a point of view that nobody else is speaking to here. I've been a victim of the disconnect, and I've decided what I will address, and what I will address is the brutality of the dismemberment abortion. Now, right here in South Carolina, a couple of weeks ago or less, a man was arrested in the upstate for starving a dog to death. People were horrified. It was torture. It was a torture killing of an animal. Then, a week ago, in another state, a young man was arrested for cutting the ears and the nose off of a puppy. Made national news, probably made international news. People rightly reacted in horror to the barbaric actions these people did. But why is it savagery to do this to an animal? But the same thing done to a baby is defended, a living, unborn baby. Now, an abortionist uses scissors, tongs, clamps, and he tears a baby apart, limb from limb. But we speak of it as this a minor issue. People defend this kind of barbaric practice, and they ignore the truth. But I'm not going to ignore the truth, because you see, in a way, I've already suffered while these innocent living babies are suffering every day as we speak. I was in the Marine Corps. I was wounded in Vietnam. I spent 2 years and 3 months in a hospital. I had 27 operations, and I have been dismembered. I know what it's like. And let me tell you, it's not fun. I spent 46 years in this wheelchair because I was dismembered in 1969. And this is what's happening in South Carolina. Now, I underwent my dismemberment as a last resort to save my life. I cannot imagine dismemberment being used to kill a living, unborn babies. The procedure the doctors used on me would never be used on me if it wasn't necessary. I can't imagine it being used to kill someone. But it's happening now. It's happening in this country. You know, back in the Middle Ages, criminals, not innocent people, criminals were drawn and quartered. A civilized world outlawed that. But babies are being drawn and quartered, the equivalent of that now in the uterus. And they're being killed. And you cannot get past that fact. It's barbaric. It needs to be protected. So, why is it a horror to rip the ears off of a puppy? But it's not a horror to rip the ears off and the legs and the face and the arms and the hands and the feet off of an unborn baby, it is a horror. And this state, God willing, will outlaw it. And I'm asking y'all to do what's right and to outlaw it and to stop this kind of torture killings of innocent, living, unborn babies. Thank you.
Wayne, we certainly appreciate your testimony today, and we all commend you and thank you for the service that you've given our country as well, Wayne. So thank you again for being here, and thank you for the testimony. Thank you. Next up is Eve Stacy.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, subcommittee. I have one very brief but I think important comment. For those of you who believe that less government is more, this is where government should end, not begin. A woman's decision about her reproductive health should not be interfered with by politicians. I am pro-life, but I'm also pro-choice. I've been fighting for women's reproductive health and rights for over 40 years. Please join me in that fight. Please protect the women of South Carolina and do not pass this piece of legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Eve. Thanks for being here with us. Any questions for Eve at all? Thank you. Thanks for being here. Next up, I've got Peter.
Nikos.
Sir?
Nikos.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Yes, I'm a professor at USC and have known some of these people for quite some time.
Thank you, Peter.
You just heard Wayne Cockfield speak eloquently about cruelty to animals contrasted with cruelty to unborn human beings. One is outlawed, the other is not. He also gave a very apt comparison of D&E with drawing and quartering. That was a cruel and unusual method of execution that is outlawed by the U.S. Constitution. Now, there's an alternative that was given. One is to have the unborn child killed humanely. I mean, there are humane methods of execution that are used, like lethal injections. And I've never heard any argument that that would be more dangerous to the woman than the present procedure of D&E. Now, abortion rights propagandists say that their argument against all this, but you haven't heard it because they don't want to talk about the unborn child. The main argument is a myth that the abortion rights movement has promulgated for decades, and that is that a functioning cerebrum is necessary for feeling pain. There was even an article in JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association, which made this claim by an abortion rights propagandist who later was revealed to be a propagandist. That article was chock-a-block full of footnotes and references, but this one myth had no footnote, no reference, no source, because there isn't any. This is just a myth that has been promulgated. And back in 1988, long before this article, there was another article in JAMA which talked about how anencephalics and hydrancephalics can feel pain despite the lack of a functioning cerebrum. And there's also a Pain Aware Act that was recently signed by Governor, our former governor, who is now a UN representative. That outlawed abortion after the 20th week, which was before the cerebrum starts to function, because of all the evidence that doctors have presented that premature babies at that stage can feel pain. And there's plenty of evidence that even younger ones can feel pain, but there is so much opposition by people like the first 7 people who spoke against the bill that the pro-life movement had to amass a tremendous amount of evidence in order to be able to make this bill go through. Now, now as to alternatives. The people testifying against the bill, we're talking about alternatives, and we've been given one. And there was another that was mentioned, and that was early induction of labor. And we were told that induction of labor can take several days, but so can D&E. It generally requires the insertion of laminaria, which slowly swell to dilate the vagina sufficiently for D&E to be a safe procedure for the woman. You cannot do D&E with an undilated vagina. And as far as the humaneness of the procedure, there's no question. Induction of labor is far more humane than the current D&E procedure. The baby is born alive, sure, but it's not viable, so it will die very soon. And while it's dying, it can be given in hospices. Palliative care is given to dying people. And so, one other possibility, we were told that partial abortion was safe back when it was still not outlawed, and what's to keep the same procedure from just pulling the baby out altogether and then having the same effect as early induction? Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for being with us, Peter. We appreciate your testimony. Next up is Jacqueline, is it Pavlicek?
Yeah, good job.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Thank you for being here with us.
Good afternoon.
Push that button again. I need that red light.
There we go. Good afternoon. My name is Jacqueline Pavlicek. I'm an attorney here in Columbia, South Carolina, and I'm here to speak on behalf of myself. I am a new mother. Recently gave birth to Adeline Jo Pavlicek, and she is just over 3 months old. I cannot imagine what a woman would go through when faced with the devastating decision to abort their child. However, I think it's just unconscionable that we are seeking to impose more restrictions on how that happens. At the end of the day, one way or another, the pregnancy will be terminated. And I think that the decision on when and how to perform that abortion should be solely within the doctor-patient relationship. I think it is unconscionable that the committee is even considering requiring a woman to undergo labor and induction to prolong this already traumatic process. And I hope that you will vote against this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Thank you for sharing that with us today. Next up, I've got Nico. Is it Shutt? Nikki Shutt? Thanks, Nikki.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Nikki Shutt. I'm an attorney here in town. I'm a certified labor and employment law specialist. As Chairman Delaney knows, I work mainly in the area of employee benefits. And so I rise mainly to talk to you about the cost factors. Because if this subcommittee recommends this bill and puts it forth, then what's going to happen is the General Assembly's law is going to be pitted against insurance companies. Because what's been described in the medical testimony is that we have two alternatives for the second trimester. One is a relatively quick process. The other one...
Is your mic off? I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. Do you want me to start again? I didn't realize it was off. Did you hear me? Okay. So you're pitting the General Assembly against healthcare providers. So when you have a healthcare provider, you have a medical community that makes a decision, then the insurance gets to weigh in and decide what's medically necessary and what they're going to pay for. So between two options, what's been described by the medical testimony is that the safest for
the mother, and the most cost-effective is the quick procedure, the D&E. The other one is inducing labor, which can take days and requires medical hospital stays, and is going to be a lot more expensive. The folks, hopefully the folks that are seeking the termination of the pregnancy have insurance. If they don't, then we know that everybody in this room pays the bill for that. And if the choice is between one less invasive, quicker procedure than inducing pregnancy and having to spend days in the hospital, we're talking about a great deal of difference, and the taxpayer is going to pay the difference. So, because the insurance company is not going to pay the difference. So I offer my thoughts on that point, and I would urge to support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate your testimony. That was the last speaker we had signed up to talk today. Is there anyone else in the crowd who would like to come forward? Raise your hand. Wendy, come on forward. And Wendy, when we get up here, we'd love to have you spell your first and last name for us for the record.
I was going to spell my last name anyway for you. It's Wendy, W-E-N-D-Y, and my last name is Kulick, K-U-L-I-C-K.
Thank you,
And
Wendy.
I know I originally told you when you came in, Peter, that I didn't plan to speak, but I've been impressed by the testimony, both medical and personal, from doctors and lawyers and women, and I agree with those who urge you to oppose H.3548. We constantly hear elected officials tell us at all levels that government is too much in our lives. Yet bills such as H.3548 invade women's lives and our bodies. I would disagree with people who identify themselves as being pro-life, because the fact is that many of them are merely pro-birth. Once a baby is born, he or she is on his or her own. I urge you to oppose H.3548. Thank you.
Wendy, thank you. Thank you for driving up here. We appreciate your time. And we have one other gentleman. Please come forward if you could spell your first and last name for us, please.
Thank you. My name is Hugh Palmer, H-U-G-H-P-A-L-M-E-R, and I'm here in support of this bill. I'm simply a layperson. I'm not a member of an organization or a member of any group. I have no medical training or anything of that nature. I just know it's morally wrong. And I would like for you to take just a moment to consider what goes on at that particular procedure. Just consider the barbaric nature of it and what happens to a living human being inside the womb. And I will state again that I'm in favor of this bill and would ask you to move it forward and process it. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your testimony, and thank you for coming in here to offer your thoughts on the bill. Anyone else? That's the last one we had signed up, last one we had raised their hand to come forward. I want to commend everyone on the civility that we had here today on this hearing. I appreciate each and every person that came forward and shared their thoughts, shared their experiences. I know this is a tough subject for a lot of folks, and the respect that was shown to each other is fantastic, and I appreciate everyone doing so. Any discussion on this particular bill between the subcommittee members? I don't see any, so the next order of business is going to be a favorable report as amended